So, bonjour à toutes et à tous. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this round table this morning. I'm very pleased and honored to facilitate this round table. I will switch to English because all this debate, this discussion will be all in English today, at least this morning, for this first round table. So I'm Sébastien Zimmer. I'm a partner at Emerton, which is an independent consulting firm. I'm from the Paris office, and I'm very pleased today to facilitate this roundtable with four very well-known participants. First, Amir SHARIFI from Ardian, who is a senior managing director at Ardian. François BILLARD, who is managing director at Geosel. Peter van Is, who is a sector banker for new energies and hydrogen at AB & AMRO, and Geoffroy ANGER, who is head of the H2 and CO2 transport division at GRTGaz. So let's start this session with a brief introduction of each participant, who will shortly present their activity regarding hydrogen and share some slides about what are their views about potential hydrogen infrastructure development. So first, I'm very pleased to give the floor to Amir, who will present his ideas about hydrogen infrastructure. So Amir, please.
Thank you, Sébastien. Good morning, everyone. Very pleased to be with you this morning, and hello again for those whom I met yesterday already. So I wanted to kick off with a statement that to achieve energy transition, we need the collaboration between not only the industrials that bring the projects, the state that will provide the regulation and the subsidies and the support to make things happen, but also private investments. And effectively, if you want to decarbonize at big scale, you need major investments. So, peut-être avant de mettre la slide, on va attendre juste quelque chose. So, in this context, at Ardian, we are a fund manager. We have $150 billion of assets under management, which places us as the leading fund manager of European origin in the world. And we have established a very strong and ambitious strategy for the energy transition. This is the reason why we have been pushing for a dedicated initiative around climate action, and even setting up a dedicated fund for impact. And in fact, 2 years ago, we have made a major announcement because we started and established a hydrogen dedicated fund, which is called Hy24. And with Hy24, we have been in a position to create a fund that has $2 billion to be deployed solely on hydrogen infrastructures. And we have been doing this together with big industrial groups like Air Liquide, Total, and Vinci from France. We also have GRT, EDF, and many other French institutions that have been active and participating to the creation of that fund and being contributors to this fund. But we also have some major financial institutions from the world. I'm saying this because fund managers typically, generally, they tend to be looking at making investments with a view that let's just go and optimize risk return, and on the infrastructure side, it's rather let's reduce the risk, reduce the return. We're fine with that. But in fact, if you are into in the hydrogen world, if you want to reduce the risk, you can't invest because it's a nascent industry. And this is where we need to define a mandate and a strategy that is adapted for this new sector. And this is the reason why we had created this dedicated fund that has a higher risk appetite, that has people in the team that come from the industry, that have investors that come from the industry, and that is suited to make the investment in this field. We are strong believers that hydrogen is unavoidable to achieve the energy transition. And we are convinced that if you want to achieve large-scale energy transition, you can only achieve it if you are not only covering production of hydrogen assets, but also covering the full value chain. Because if you don't have demand, and if you don't have also something that connects production and demand, you will not be able to do it. So effectively, this fund will also invest in the full value chain. And in particular, there is one area that today is a bit of a blind spot in terms of the investments that have been made so far, which is the midstream part. We have the upstream, which is like if we compare it with the oil sector, it's where you get the product out of the ground. In the case of hydrogen, you don't get it out of the ground. You produce it by electrolysis or by other means, which means that you use renewable energy and you combine it with water and you get hydrogen out of it. That's the upstream part. On the downstream part, you have some major usages on the industrial side, on what we call the hard-to-abate sectors that cannot be decarbonized with electricity. So we have steel, we have aluminum, we have cement, and we also have some very intensive uses for mobility. And all these usages require hydrogen, which is much more efficient to achieve that goal than using batteries. But if you want to produce that hydrogen in the best locations and not just close to the consumption center, because you want to have the lowest cost of production, then you will, in many cases, and if not in almost all of the cases, need to have transportation of that molecule from one place to another. It can be short distances, it can also be very long distances. It can be distances that connect the world to each other. So in the future, there might be a production, and there will be, and there is already plans for production of mega-scale, giga-scale plants in Australia, in Chile, in the Middle East, that will carry, and they will need to be carried, that molecule, to the consumption countries, which are Asia, US, and Europe. But inside of Europe, when the molecule gets there, you also need to carry it to the right location. And the issue we have is that at the start, the consumption and the visibility you have in consumption is limited. And if you want to have what we typically like as an infrastructure investor, low risk, low return, to make the investment is difficult. Now it's time for the slide. Yeah, the second presentation. Because if you apply the classical, if you have an investment in capex, have heavy capital expenditure, and you divide that capital expenditure by the volume of molecules that will be secured, and you derive from this a price of the hydrogen.
Sorry, can you please change the presentation, please? Switch to the other one.
So in 1 minute, you will see the famous slide that we're trying to see from the start. This will show you that at the beginning, there is a very high cost attached to that single, that you'll need to pay a very high tariff to justify that you will pay for your investment at the earlier years. So in this graph, you can see that if you wanted to do the maths, to make it logical and economical, you need to apply a tariff of 1.7 euros per kilo of hydrogen only for the transportation. And if you compare that with the cost of the production, which may be once optimized 3 to 4 euros per kilo, you can't really accept that you will pay 1.7 euros per kilo because it's going to be half of the cost. So it's just not possible. The right price should be in the region of what we can see after 2035 on this graph. 0.1, 0.2, that's the right order of magnitude of where the cost should get there. But you can see that during the first 5 years, it is just simply too expensive because you don't have enough volumes, and if you want to make your investment worth it, then you have to pay a very high tariff, and the first clients will pay a very high tariffs to justify this. Usually how it works is that to get those volumes secured, you organize, and that's how it works. My colleague here from Geoffroy will explain that much better than I do. But if you want to, you will book capacity, and as you can see here, capacities are being booked with what we call first open seasons. And the open seasons, you can see that the curve is really growing over time in a way that is getting you to an optimum, not at the start, but probably 7 or 8 years after the start of your construction of your asset is in place. So that means that you have different phases in your infrastructure when you want to set it. And this means that your cost of hydrogen, if you want to be able to amortize it, you effectively need to have a mechanism that will enable you to de-risk that investment. And this is where I will make a proposal right here, which is to say the bottom of this chart, below the first red line, this is something that typically a TSO, an infrastructure investor, will be very comfortable to invest in, because they will see a very high visibility and probability to get there. The stage above, that gets you to a higher risk, higher volume area. This is something where there is higher risk and higher return attached to it. And this is where probably you will need to have support to make it happen. And typically, what all the players in the private sector say is, when it's too risky and we can't just make it work, then we ask for the state to do it. The state is kind of a venture capitalist. They take super high risk. They don't expect any returns, but if it works, then it's like a super rich return, because then it creates jobs and industries come, etc. So they act. The state is the super venture capitalist of the industry, in fact. But between this venture capitalist risk that the state can take and the very low risk that the infrastructure players want to take, there is probably a gray zone where, if you want to accelerate your energy transition, particularly in the context where states don't have that much money to put now as well into the energy transition, there are so many things that need to be done. Well, there is a space for higher risk, higher return expectation that private sector can take, and infrastructure funds, which have a dedicated mandate, can take. And this is where we can provide a solution. I will conclude by saying that if we don't, you could tell me, you could object, well, why don't we do smaller things, smaller pipelines, so that effectively you don't have this risk of creating, why don't you create, well, if you create an overcapacity, then of course you have higher tariffs at the start. So why don't you do smaller things from the start? And so if you do that, then you don't have this problem of overcapacity. Well, in fact, the problem if you do things small and then you multiply smaller pipelines is that you increase the total cost of this infrastructure for the final user ultimately down the road by a factor of probably close to 44% being the difference that you will of overcost that the final user will be paying. If we want to get the energy transition to be at the lowest cost for the system, we need to create infrastructures that will be designed from the start at the right volume. And this is why we, and this graph shows you that if you have one pipeline if you have two pipelines of 20 inches each, then you have a cost of 600 kilos per year. If you have one pipeline of 36 foot, then you have a 44% lower cost. And this is why this is money that we want in the pocket of the consumers, of the citizens, and not overspent because we have not designed the infrastructure at the right scale from the start. So this is the proposal we have today on our side.
So thank you, Amir, for this presentation and for the relevance you made about the infrastructure and the different types of fundings which you just described, which would be needed to optimize a future network. Now, I propose to switch the floor to François in order to if he can let us know how this kind of infrastructure development could be materialized regarding Geosel and its own activity and current oil pipeline and storage activity.
Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm François. I'm Managing Director at Geosel. Geosel's mission is to supply strategic storage for energy supply, mostly hydrocarbon as of today, due to the current mix. And we have an initiative in hydrogen production called HYVENTS, which aims at producing 15,000 tons of hydrogen per year from the electricity generated by a huge solar farm, about 500 hectares and 800 gigawatts per year of power. And this initiative called HYVENTS, we call it HYVENTS because it's Hydrogène de Provence, and so everybody is high, but we are HYVENTS. Considering this, the need for HYVENTS is located in the middle of the industrial zone of Fos-sur-Mer, La Vera, La Med zone, usually called Étang-Berre industrial zone. And the problem we have to solve is how do we provide our customer, our potential customer, with our hydrogen. And the pipeline, like Amir explained, pipeline is clearly the best way to transport hydrogen on some distances. And so we tried to get the low-hanging fruit, and really we concentrated on something very local, a local buckle of infrastructure. And the first point is that we, as an energy logistic supplier, we own some pipeline infrastructure as of today. As you know, there are gas pipelines and hydrocarbon pipelines. We own some hydrocarbon pipeline, and some of those pipelines are available for conversion, for reuse, for hydrogen, and it's possible. And here we have represented something that we think is clearly feasible in a short term and with a limited financial exposure. It's clearly a link between the two sides of Fos-sur-Mer Bay. On the left side, on the western side, as a matter of fact, you have the Fos-sur-Mer area, and on the eastern side, you have the La Vera area. And you can see there is a blue pipeline, a dark blue pipeline that is represented here between HYVENTS and La Vera. This pipeline is owned, as a matter of fact, this pipeline is owned by Geosel and is potentially available for conversion. And in the magenta line that goes from this pipeline to the Fos-sur-Mer area, there is some available. We have identified some pipelines available. And such an infrastructure for us would have a lot of merits because it connects clearly some potential producer. HYVENTS is one of those, but there are others. Some potential producers to some potential customers. And by doing so, we believe that we can create a first market, a first step, something easy to build, something not very expensive. It's about 20 kilometers of pipeline, so everybody who owns and operates a pipeline knows that it is something that we can do. From time to time, we present investment about such range, so nothing very extraordinary, but it's an infrastructure that makes a lot of sense because it connects the current industrial user, the potential industrial user, the current producer, and the potential producer for a limited risk. Again, we have the curse that you explained, Amir, exists. But as the investment is much lower, then the risk is much lower. And we believe that such an infrastructure could be connected to major infrastructure, huge infrastructure. It could be the Barmar project, as you've heard about. It could be a link between south of France and northern Europe. It could be many things. And we believe that a consortium should be created around this with the public support. Again, we need to have some public support to start all this, but clearly it's something that we believe is feasible and should be seriously considered.
Thank you very much, François, for this this description of your project in the south of France, which is so Yvon's, well noted. And let's switch the floor now to Peter van Es, who will present some slides about his own experience about Northwest European market, and especially focused in the Netherlands and Germany.
Yeah, thank you, Sébastien. Now, I'm going to stand up because I'm going to make an even blunter proposal than Amir has done. I think after the proposal, well, maybe we should all start singing the Marseillaise and solve the whole thing, because Amir pointed to one particular thing, and that is the state as the super venture capitalist. And the difference between France and the Netherlands is path dependency, and I will explain the concept of path dependency to you. It's a term that stems from software development or political sciences. They both use it, and it means that once you have taken a certain decision in the past, there is only a limited amount of decisions you can take in the future or today. And this is a big difference between France and the Netherlands today when it comes to developing the major and massive amount of infrastructure that is being developed in the Netherlands right now. I am borrowing the slides from the Port of Rotterdam and GasUnie. GasUnie is the Dutch TSO, and both Port of Rotterdam and GasUnie are state-owned. That means that both of them don't have have different risk metrics in mind when they develop their projects. And at the same time, Holland is already producing and consuming 1,200 megatons of 1,200 kilotons, so 1.2 megatons of hydrogen today. And if we want to decarbonize that hydrogen, because the CO2 emissions that come from the hydrogen consumption that we have in Holland today already is 8% of the Dutch national GHG, or carbon dioxide emissions. So greening the Dutch hydrogen sector already takes away 8% of the emissions we have. We can't get the green power to do that, and if we want to bring in the molecules that we need going forward to replace the fossil fuels that we are currently using, then we need much more green power to produce those green molecules, and obviously we don't have the space to do it. So we're going to import it, and as we speak, there is a conference going on in Rotterdam right now, and 11,000 people, according to Thierry, the organizers themselves yesterday said 10,000 people are showing up to discuss only hydrogen. Including delegations from Oman, from Chile, from Mauritania, because those will be the countries that will be producing the hydrogen that will find its way all the way to, for instance, Marseille or to Rotterdam. The imports that Rotterdam is aiming for 2030 by itself, already, so 2030, that's tomorrow, 3 megatons of hydrogen. And to make sure that that hydrogen can get distributed to the Dutch economy and to Germany and Belgium, you need infrastructure. A lot of the infrastructure is already there, partly because of the path dependency in the past. These pipelines have already been there, and you can upgrade them, and you can dig up the corridors and add new pipes to it, and that is exactly what will happen. This is the hydrogen infrastructure grid that GasUnie is already developing. It is well, there are 3 phases. The first phase is making sure that the hydrogen production that will take place in 2025 in Rotterdam, about 500 megawatt, 400 megawatt, will reach the rest of the port. And there are already hydrogen pipelines in the port, one owned by Air Liquide, that runs all the way to Antwerp and to Dunkirk, and one owned by Air Products. So a major issue is, and it was discussed yesterday as well, is the importance of storage and large-scale storage. And GasUnie is developing in the north 4.5 megatons of storage ready in 2026, 2027. And if you have the storage ready, then all the off-takers can get the hydrogen whenever they want in the quantities they need. And that is exactly, of course, how a hydrogen backbone should function. The links to Germany will be phase 3, and that is being planned between 2030, 2035, 2040. Depends a bit on how fast the Germans go. There is something else going on in Holland. There is the hydrogen backbone that GasUnie is developing, but it is, according to Rotterdam, which is another state-owned company, is not going fast enough. So they say we need a pipe that ships hydrogen directly from the port to the Ruhr area in Germany. And as we speak, there are debates going on whether GasUnie should be part of that exercise or not, or whether we will leave it to private enterprises. The proposal that I want to make is that I think that if you look at the way Holland has developed its assets, and the way everybody thinks that in the north everything is privatized, not everything is privatized. A lot of these things are in public hands. My proposal is that France, la République française et ses citoyens pourraient nationaliser les entreprises Terega, Storangy et GRT. Merci.
So, it's a very good occasion to switch the floor to Geoffroy. So maybe I will let you a few minutes to think about the proposal before reacting to that. But as a first slide, maybe Geoffroy, you would like to present GRTGaz position in the hydrogen and the ongoing projects and where you are and where you want to go within your current gas assets, which can be partially converted to hydrogen. So please, Geoffroy.
Thank you, Sébastien, and thank you to all my colleagues who already explained a lot of what I wanted to explain. I'm fully aligned now with most of what has been said, and I'm thinking about your proposal of going a public company. I'm Geoffroy ANGER. Good morning to all. I'm in charge of business development for hydrogen and CO2 transmission within GRTGaz. And I have basically four messages to deliver today. First one, I won't spend too long on it, is of course we believe in transport and storage infrastructure are key for the development of a massive H2 market. We have a clear view of Repower EU objectives of 20 million tons. We are talking about huge volumes. If we decline it in France, we are talking about 6 to 7 gigawatt electrolysis. So that won't be done thanks to small projects of 10 or 5 megawatts on each corner of France. We need massive projects with huge volumes. And when you say huge volumes, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of tons per project that will be need to be transported to reach their customers and to be connected to storages. So that's clear for us. I think that's clear for everybody. So I won't spend too much time on it. What we understand when we talk to customers is three things. First, they need competitiveness. So that's what we do. We connect these customers, industrial customers, who need to have access to the best source of hydrogen. They need security of supply. So that's also what we want to do. We are working with our colleagues from storages, and these projects will conquer and help having this security of supply across Europe. Finally, last point here is that they want hydrogen now. What I want to say is, if we look at our projection and our vision, we always talk about what will happen in 2050, what will happen in 2040, and our vision in GRTGaz and with our colleagues TSO across Europe. That's what you can see on the right hand of the map of the slide. The map is an interconnected network. But what I want to emphasize and to highlight today is that projects are happening now. They want some key industrials in France, but across Europe also. They need to decarbonize now, before 2030. And in infrastructure timing, that's really now, and that's almost fast. So we have to act now, and that's what we are doing within GRTGaz. You can see on the left-hand side our current projects. We are basically developing in two steps. First step is to develop local hubs. as François mentioned, going to closer to customers with producers which are close to the customers, building regional hubs. So that's what we do in Fos-sur-Mer in connection with Geosel. That's what we do in the eastern part of France. We have 2 projects considering retrofit of pipelines. That's what we do in Dunkerque area. Basically, all the industrial area in France, we are present and we are proposing network solutions. So that's the first step. Second step will be to interconnect these hubs one with another in order to help balancing demand, in order to connect with storage and achieve security of supply. So that's the second step, or the second stage we want to achieve, connect with our colleagues from Enagás in Spain, thanks to Barmar project, and to Germany, thanks to a connection from Fos to northeast of France. So we have concrete projects. Let me say it again. We are developing right now. What we do is going talk to the customers. Amir presented it in his slides. We do open season, we call for interest, and we co-develop with key industrials, producers of hydrogen, or future consumers of hydrogen. And what we do basically, we call for interest and we co-develop. We co-design the network. We see what is the concrete demand that has to be supplied in the first step, and what will be the future demand in order to have this planification, I would say, and this possibility to develop this nascent market, which will be growing. Third message is we need to use existing infrastructure. So we need to use all existing infrastructures that can be suitable for hydrogen transportation. So we have a concrete project right now in the northeast of France, which is called Modérée. We consider retrofitting something around 70 kilometers of natural gas pipeline connecting to a large consumer in Germany with a steel producer. We are working with our fellow colleagues from Germany, Kreos Deutschland, and we are about to take our final investment decision this year in order to reach COD in 27. This project is a kind of first of a kind for GRTGaz and will allow us to establish standards in order to be able to replicate this methodology to other pipelines. Together with our national regulation authority, CRE, we have worked, and you may have seen this report issued a few weeks ago. We have identified some pipelines that could be not necessary for natural gas system in the coming years. These pipelines will be studied in order to be retrofitted to be part of this huge interconnecting network called the European Hydrogen Backbone. Finally, I would like to thank Amir for explaining this issue of risk sharing, which is a key issue for everybody now. We see that we have very voluntary actors, industrials that need to decarbonize now, and we know that many will follow, but how do we manage to develop the right size of the network, as we have seen, and to be able not to use this scale effect by installing and laying up the right size of the network. So that's an issue, of course, we have thought about a lot, and we are in line with the idea that we have to share the risk. Of course, GRTGaz and TSOs in general, I think, we believe that H2 is a growing market, so we are ready to take a share of the risk. But we believe also that customers, when I say customers, industrials, we will consume, or producers have to take their part. And finally, we need clear public support when I think that's a recurring issue we hear today. Public support through subsidies, through visibility on the regulations that will be applied will help having this clarity and this vision of how we share the risk and help customers decide of investing and booking capacities in the network. So I think that's it. So 4 messages. Infrastructure are key to deliver low cost and safe supply of hydrogen. They need it now. That meaning that they are ready to finance studies and to book capacities on the network now because they want to achieve their target before 2030. Conversion of natural gas assets or other assets, sorry, François, are key to help lower the capex. And finally, risk sharing is an issue we have to address and address rapidly if we don't want to build too small a network.
Thank you very much, Geoffroy, for your presentation, which I think has been very complementary and consistent with the other point of view which has been expressed today. I think it gives a very good and exhaustive overview of the role of infrastructure, future infrastructure, hydrogen infrastructure in the development of hydrogen local, regional and even national and pan-European future markets, including long distance transit and importation. Some of you, notably Peter and Amir, directly addressed, and you, Geoffroy, as well, you addressed the role of risk sharing in the building of a new hydrogen infrastructure, which is key because, as I understood from what you said, we could derive from what you say that the current applicable regulatory framework is not enough. I would say is not adapted to as it is right now, and as it is working for a few decades for gas and even power, is not fully suitable for to ensure the rapid development of an hydrogen infrastructure, because we start from almost zero. So we have to build something from zero with a risk profile which has nothing to do with the profile which was existing when gas was regulated and power was regulated, because we started from existing infrastructure on the whole value chain, including production, transmission, storage for gas and commercialization. Now we are starting from almost zero, and I think this is the important point to get in mind, to have in mind, which is the key idea, which will have very strong implications. So having a question on that for you, before we switch some questions from the audience. What do you think about what would be the key enablers from your point of view in order to accelerate and to allow a concrete project to emerge, not only on a local scale, but also on a larger scale, including pan-European hydrogen transmission? I don't know who wants to take this question. Peter, maybe.
Well, the French state should simply tell these folks to start going. And the question is, are you going to pay subsidies to private companies, or are you going to pay those, let's say, subsidies to yourself? And also reap the benefits from it. And I just used, so when we were previously discussing this, the example of the TGV, when the French government decided to build out the TGV network, everybody is benefiting from it, but nobody cared about, okay, who exactly is the customer going to be? And this is where I think the state has a major role to play, not in terms of setting regulations and frameworks and subsidies, etc., but they should simply, let's say, push the industry forward and find a mechanism to make the industry do what is in line with with hopefully a French industrial strategy. And if there is no industrial strategy, then France should be very quickly to develop that industrial strategy around hydrogen.
Maybe to add to what you're saying, Peter, is that this industrial strategy that you're referring and calling is something that needs a global vision, and this global vision starts with understanding what is the current existing infrastructures that can be used, and at what point in time they will be made available to transit new molecules. And in fact, the point is that depending on the countries in Europe, the pace at which you will be reducing the amount of molecules from fossil sources will not be the same. And it happens that in some countries, it will take you still until 2050 to have a big amount of molecules from fossil sources that will still be used in these infrastructures. So the transition is very difficult, because if you say, well, we want to repurpose existing infrastructures because that's the cheapest way to do it, but at the same time that this same infrastructure is already used for something else, and even if the volume is decreasing, even if it's still used at 40% or 50%, it's still, I mean, it's been amortized for very long, so it's still profitable for the company to keep it going. So they will not decide to, stop using it just because it has to be green. There has to be a business case for doing the conversion. So the issue is that this issue of the legacy and the heritage makes it very difficult to switch and to optimize that cost of the conversion, which goes against the objectives of going quick and reducing the cost. And so ultimately you have to find solutions for that. And one thing that we've been thinking, which is also linked to this risk sharing mechanism and also the need for a regulatory framework that is adapted, is that you have right of ways. So a big part of the cost that is the cost of creating an infrastructure is not just the steel that is used on the pipe. It's a lot of the civil works that need to be done, and the time that it takes to build infrastructure is also the time that you get for permitting. And if you have an existing infrastructure, you have already spent time on permitting. You have already made the civil works, and sometimes you even have space to build another pipeline nearby. So that can be a transitory way that you don't minimize the cost fully, but you reduce a big portion of that cost by using the right-of-way and having a parallel pipe running next to your existing pipe, which gives you the option to have two pipes running in parallel, one that is still profitable, even if the volume is declining, and one that is not profitable with a rising volume. And in fact, you could even think that, to go to the point of risk sharing, is that one could subsidize the other, in fact, because that would be logical, that the infrastructure that has been amortized for a long time, that is still profitable, you could function a small level of its profitability and to use it to reduce that same curve that we discussed before. So that could be one way that we can deal with accelerating the energy transition.
I think if I come back to your question, Sébastien, about the enabler and the barrier, if I look at the question at the other side, one key enabler, of course, is kind of defining the vision that we want to achieve, and this kind of planification of energy system globally is a key issue for us right now. If we look, there is a French joke which says that predictions are very difficult, especially when they're dealing with future. But we think that the public power has this ability to frame what will be our energy mix in the coming years. Of course, I think we all agree on that. And we, GRTGaz, we are involved in natural gas transmission, but also biogas, biomethane transmission. And we believe that we need to have these clear signals for all the power mix, meaning electricity, natural gas, and other sources, to have this view of what will be the key assets we can retrofit. So first, having this first vision and this framework saying, well, where do we want to go? What we want to achieve in terms of decarbonization, and what will be the means we want to use in order to have this ideal energy mix is the first issue. So, second point for me, which is key, is cooperation. Cooperation, we see what's missing to develop this interconnecting network between TSO is cooperation between countries, between TSO, between public and private partners, meaning industrial consumers, producers, TSO, infrastructure fund. We see ourselves, GRTGaz, and basically I think all TSO, we are connecting users. We are a link between two fundamental elements of the value chain. So we see ourselves as kind of facilitator, being able to talk to everyone. GRTGaz, we are pure player of transmission and natural gas. For those who don't know, we are a regulated activity. We are not allowed to go into production, sale of natural gas. This is what we want to replicate in hydrogen transport. And we are kind of neutral player with only interest on transmission, and we are able to talk to everybody in a fair and transparent way. And I think that's also a key issue in order to achieve this cooperation.
François, if you want to add some conclusive word before we switch to some questions from the audience.
I'm not sure I will be conclusive, but at least I will elaborate on what has been said. First of all, pipelines are transporting hydrocarbons, whether they are in a gaseous form or in a liquid forms. But both pipelines should be considered, gas pipelines and liquid hydrocarbons pipeline. On my point of view is that clearly I won't elaborate on the need for state support and things like that, but we should start, my vision is we should start locally and with a small step. It's much easier to do a small step than to do a huge step. And I believe that in this area of Fos-sur-Mer, there are already available pipelines. There are liquid hydrocarbons pipeline, as a matter of fact, because hydrocarbon industry has more of a 100-year history. So during all of its history, there are some assets available. And just to give a figure, 2/3 of the cost of a pipeline, it's the right of way. Clearly, if you want to build a new pipeline, 1/3 is the construction itself, the steel, the pipeline itself. But 2/3 of the cost is really the right of way. And this right of way already exists. So they exist. They are easy to transfer. They are easy to convert. Permitting issues are much easier to tackle than starting from scratch. And clearly, there exist some assets that are already available for conversion. Donc, to elaborate on what you said, Peter, it's very easy to have a very big push. This push can be also, there is no competition between gaseous pipeline and liquid hydrocarbon pipelines. All this, in the end, will be the same network. And at the end, we need to transport molecules that provide energy to our future customer and to the general public. So basically, start with local hubs, like you did in Netherlands, as a matter of fact. You've presented the Gas-Uni scheme, which is quite smart, as a matter of fact, and it's a great inspiration for us. And this local buckle I showed you is clearly very much inspired at a lower level, Peter, obviously, but it's very much inspired of what has been done in the Netherlands. And my strongest wish is that we know there are a few numbers of actors able to do this, that we get strong support, a strong push from the authorities, the public authorities, to do this conversion. It's a small step, but it's a major step. It can really, it's a game changer if you link Fos-sur-Mer area and Berre area is one of the energy hub of France. If we change this, if we mix the public support and the private investors, and we know that public is very much interested and the private investors are very much interested, so it's really there. We just have to do it. It's a low-hanging fruit. So we could start by a small infrastructure that will show the huge benefits to link current customers of hydrogen and current producer of hydrogen with a dedicated infrastructure. And it will be, I'm sure it will be a great demonstration. And then, Geoffroy, we already talked together very much about that. Okay. So
cooperation is ongoing right now.
And start with something easy, already available on the table. Some hydrocarbons pipeline that are already available on the table to be converted.
Okay, Thank you. So maybe I think we have a question there in the room, at least a few questions. I see maybe Mr. Leperc there.
Thierry Leperc from Ideal. 4 months ago, Amir, we were attending the Dia del Hidrógeno from Enagás. Enagás is an interesting experience. It's your partner in Enagás Renovables. And Enagás announced 4,000 kilometers of pipelines and 4.2 billion euros of investment. And no, Peter, they're not a government-owned company. A government owns 5% of them. And in France, we have the experience of companies owned 100% by the government, and honestly, it doesn't work very well. So if we have a model to follow, it's probably more the Spanish model than the French model. My question is, you're talking about de-risking, basically, the deployment of this infrastructure. And you say the government should step in, and probably it should. But Spain's shown another way. They've shown that you de-risk because you have downstream and you have upstream. And midstream doesn't exist without upstream and downstream. So my question is very simple to all the panelists. Where are the customers? And where are the producers? Because in the end, you want to de-risk your infrastructures because you have customers. And the 4.2 billion euros that Enagás is investing is backed by customers. We're working on that with Amir. And also producers. So question, where are the customers and where are the producers in the case of France?
In the case of France. Did you say that?
That's exactly, Thierry, that's exactly why I promote this small project of local loop in Fos-sur-Mer, because there are existing customers, there are industrials, they are clearly in the energy sectors, mostly refiners and some of chemical industries, and the potential producers are also in this area. So this local loop, it's a small infrastructure, as a matter of fact. I believe it's something easy to do because it's not very risky, because you are already linking, you are basically using available infrastructure to link existing customers to existing producers. And those producers can transform themselves to produce low carbon or green H2. I won't go further in this taxonomy issues, but basically this exists. So this local loop has a lot of merits. So it's only a little, we don't even need a big push for that, just a little push for that, and I'm quite sure that we can start from that, the first step. So we don't need a massive state initiative to do it. We just need some push, something that will make the market enough attractive for private investors and for private customers. And then it will exist. So that's why I believe such project is not the only one in France. There are probably others in other opportunities in Dunkerque and Le Havre, and maybe in Donge too. But really, we have this infrastructure available. So big plans are very nice. I like them very much, and I think, Geoffroy, your project is clearly very much attractive. And it can be directly connected to this. And this even if you consider that in Geosel, this local loop can also be connected to underground salt caverns that anybody knows are very much suitable to store hydrogen massively. This will occur in the next decade, not right now, but in the 2030-2040 decade, this will occur, the need will appear. But such a loop is consistent with starting right now with something that will still be valuable, that will still be usable for the next step. So,
but if I can complement what you're saying and to answer Thierry's question, I think the local loop in Fos-sur-Mer is more the exception than the rule. And the luck you have, to some extent, is that Fos is a highly intensive area in terms of CO2 emissions, in terms of industry, and it's also located in a place where you have sun and you have infrastructures, you have it's connected to the sea, so it has a kind of combination of things that's pretty unique, or at least there are not that many locations in Europe where you have all these elements gathered together. That's why your small project can work, because you have all these things all together. But in other cases, you have hubs, industrial hubs in France. You have them there. You have them in the region of Lyon, where we are here. You have them around the Dunkerque area. So you have a few regional hubs that actually Geoffroy presented in his slide. You also have them in Europe. But in most cases, you don't have the production, an available production or infrastructure is available there. And that's where you really need to, I think Thierry is making a very good point. You need to consider that you need to optimize the cost of carrying that molecule from the cheapest production places to those consumption centers. If you always want to collocate, if you don't have the right conditions to do it, then you will increase the cost of that molecule in the end, and you will kill the competitiveness of that industry. And that is the point: is that we are in a global world, and someone like Arcelor and the steel makers, every single cent of euro of the energy counts for the final price and their competitiveness, and they will arbitrate you between putting their steel mill in France, in Spain, or in the US, depending on what's the final cost of the energy. So if we want to keep industries in Europe, we need to get that energy at the cheapest cost and to produce it at the cheapest place. So of course, Enagás is very conscious of that, and so that's why in Spain they're developing a lot of production capabilities, but also in Morocco, in other places where connected to Europe quite easily, you have some very cheap access to solar power and wind power combined that creates you a very low cost of that hydrogen that you can carry. And also that's the reason why you need to invest into the infrastructure that will carry that hydrogen at the cheapest cost as well. And that's why we need to do it at the bigger scale from the start, because otherwise, as I demonstrated before, you will increase the cost of that molecule when you carry it. And otherwise, you will be competing with places like the US right now, where the government is providing you a $3 per kilo subsidy. $3 per kilo. So I showed you on the slide before, the cost today is in the region of 5 to 6. And at $3 difference, then in most cases, the customer can switch. So we are in a competing world, and we need to get that cost to the lowest level, and that's why we need to invest into the infrastructure from the start, because that's an enabler of reducing the cost of the molecule ultimately.
Coming back onto your question about the customers, just be sure that we work with customers and large industrial customers in all the areas I've mentioned, high-emitting areas such as Dunkerque, Le Havre, northeast of France, Fos-sur-Mer, of course. We are connected to these customers and steel producers, refineries, chemical products. We are working with them. What they tell us they need is this kind of visibility, because today we are on the verge of huge investment for decarbonization and using H2. But what they miss is this visibility and this projection of what will be the network tomorrow, what will be the contractual framework, what will be the regulatory framework. So we work with them in order to find the best way. And they commit with us. And what I want to highlight is that they finance our study. They already pre-book capacities in our local hubs. We are working. And in parallel, GRTGaz, we are working also on this planification of huge import routes and huge connection between various clusters. So that is this connection with the market and our customers that we want to promote. And of course, what we try to achieve with them is having their word heard by our public authorities, saying that they need infrastructure to access the best source of hydrogen in Europe. Because of course you can think that, well, GRTGaz, we are a TSO, we want to lay pipes everywhere. That's not the case. We want to provide a service that's useful to our customers, and our customers tells us that they will need infrastructure pipeline. So we are working in close collaboration with them.
Yeah, one remark from my side. First of all, let's see how fast Enagás will go, because we've seen many projects being announced over the years by private companies that at the end of the day still depend on public subsidies, and when they don't get it, it simply doesn't fly. And the second point I want to make is with regard to some of the industries, the energy transition will unfortunately lead to some industries leaving Europe. And is that a bad thing? Maybe not. It will force us to innovate and come up with higher margin industries. So the fact that, I mean, Holland has a steel plant, and the discussions are, I mean, that steel plant needs to green as well. They can't find the green electrons and the green molecules for it. If they leave, fine.
Okay, so maybe we have I think a last question in the room.
Hello to everyone. Under Nicolas Usil company creator, the goal is to reduce energy consumption of public and businesses buildings. And the question is, after have been to BAU in Munich just two weeks ago, what is the place of cities as a potential producer of low carbon energy, so solar and piezoelectrical as well? And what is about the valorization of this energy, green energy, not in electricity, but in hydrogen, low hydrogen? So what is the place of cities in the potential producer of hydrogen, no electricity? Because the valorization by hydrogen is most rentable for the creators or the investor in such a technology, because they are very, very expensive. And for instance, if you have one building of 1,000 square meters with a roof of 200 square meters, if you valorize it by selling it to EDF, the ROI it's like 2 years. But if you valorize it by selling, by creating with that the hydrogen and sell it in hydrogen, which is 15 euros per kilogram, it reduces hugely the ROI for the investors of business buildings and the public buildings. So what do you think about cities as the creators of low carbon hydrogen?
So your question is basically about the competition between hydrogen and renewable power.
My question is how we can use the hydrogen production to lower the time of ROI.
That's quite an interesting question, because you are comparing electricity versus hydrogen and form of productions of electricity. Hydrogen is a form of electricity. It's a form of storing and transporting electricity. So it works in certain cases. It doesn't work in other cases, like renewable energy works in certain cases and doesn't work in certain cases. Energy is a problem of mass. It's a massive problem. Energy is a commodity. So using cities, parkings, rooftops to produce energy, well, it's a good idea, but it depends on the business case. But if you only rely on a third party to buy you this energy at a higher cost than the market eventually pays for it, it won't change anything. It won't change anything. You will not go through the energy transition. You will just have some small projects and some good investments for small projects. End of the game. There is a huge benefit in concentrating the production in massive systems. Clearly, I strongly believe that, and that's why we push this events project, but also other projects like Peter explained in Netherlands. So energy is a commodity in the end. We all need energy, and we need energy at the lowest cost possible, and that's how we get to the level of development where we are today. In some cases, it's a very good idea to produce electricity in cities. covering parkings, covering roof. There should be a business case for that. Producing hydrogen inside the cities, then you have to transport the electricity. Then it might be a good case, but I doubt in the end it will be a good case. What we are working on with the Evans project is clearly a very strong integration between solar, the production of a huge solar farm, and directly using the electricity to produce. And we are very much working on a DC-DC connection. I won't go further I won't dig further into this. But, well, using cities to produce electricity, to consume this electricity in cities, for example, to load the batteries of an electric car, it's probably a very good idea. Or to heat water in a building, it's probably a very good idea. I think hydrogen by itself will be produced in industrial centers. That's my conviction.
Okay, so thank you. Thank you for your question and for your detailed answer, François. I think it's now time to conclude this roundtable session. We are not really ahead of schedule, but I think it was very interesting. I hope so for everyone. In my view, it was a very good gathering of very interesting insights from each of the participants today. So it designed a very great future for hydrogen in France and in Europe, hopefully. So let's thank you, everyone, and see you within the next meeting.